In the space of 4 years, the Polish army had transformed and had overturned the myths of 1939, from cavalry to mechanized operations. How did the Polish armed forces fare in the battles in the West? From a post-World War I technology to a World War II technology and organisation. Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The Polish armed forces did not stand a chance against the coordinated attack of the Third Reich and the Soviet Union in September 1939. When the defensive war was lost, the Polish army had to flee to fight another day. Most Polish soldiers, with some sources placing the number at over 40,000 troops, chose Hungary as their destination. The government of neighbouring Romania opened its borders to some 26,000 Polish soldiers, predominantly airmen. Lithuania and Latvia also welcomed Polish troops, around 14,000 and 3,500 respectively. Of the approximately 85,000 soldiers who fled to Poland's neighbours, some 44,000 moved further on. The bulk of the evacuees escaped to France, where the Polish government in exile, led by Prime Minister General Władysław Sikorski, decided to rebuild the Polish army to join the Allied forces. Soldiers arriving from Hungary, Romania and the Baltic states were to become its most important part. By June 1940, the Polish army abroad already numbered over 82,000 soldiers, but because of Nazi Germany's successful invasion of France, those units had to move to the UK, where Polish airmen, most notably legendary 303rd Squadron, became the bane of the German Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain. Another portion of Polish forces, which evacuated to the Levant, found itself in an unwieldy situation. When Vichy France was established after the French-German armistice on June 22, 1940, the Levant fell under Vichy control. The Polish troops there became effectively stranded in hostile or ambiguous territory. But the Polish government in exile, now based in London, worked with the British to extract or realign Polish forces in the region. Some Poles managed to escape into British-controlled territories of British Palestine, Transjordan, Iraq and Egypt. These areas became staging grounds for the Polish army in the Middle East, especially after the formation of the Anders Army in the Soviet Union in 1941.
Our guest today is Alina Nowobilska, a great friend of the programme and an independent World War II historian. Welcome once again to the programme. Great to have you.
Oh, so glad. Every time you invite me, it's a pleasure to come and talk to you.
It's a great thing to have you, and wonderful conversations we've had on World War II subjects before.
Oh, exactly.
Before we go into the transformation of the Polish army, 1939 to 1944-45, can you give us an idea of what it was like before 1939, what the 1930s Polish army looked like, how it fought, how it was dressed, how was it organised?
Well, you've got to remember there's about more than 30 divisions, at this point. So Poland's got a hefty amount of soldiers. There's a lot of people there. Things like they're trying to build up their navy at this point. Navy's been pretty decimated after World War I, and Poland's trying to build their forces together. They invest a lot of money into their navy, but they are lacking in money to invest into other things. So, for example, development of aircraft, development of tanks and other gadgets that will help improve the armed forces at this stage. It's quite a difficult time in the 1930s. Poland, like I said, they did have a strong army. It's important to know that Poland didn't face Germany in 1939 with, that silly little myth that constantly people talk about. They did have strength behind it. They were dressed, in the best they could afford. This is the problem, money. I'm going to keep bringing up this money issue because Poland doesn't have it. How long has Poland been functioning? How long has it existed realistically since 1919? It had been fighting battles in the east. It was fighting battles in the west. They're trying to build up as much as they can to be able to function, and they have that threat of Germany from the West. And of course, you know, Soviet Russia is still that threat from the East at the same time. So they're rapidly trying to do as much as they can. But by 1939, they just haven't managed to get what they need to be able to fight the Germans. And, you know, the Blitzkrieg decimates the Polish army.
So you mentioned that the Polish army had no chance to fight against Germany and then Russia, of course. When they came over to the West, what were the myths that hung around the Polish armed forces? You mentioned this legend, cavalry against tanks. Was this a kind of millstone around Poles' necks, so that they were these horse-loving rustics who were kind of swashbuckling but couldn't handle machines?
Gosh, that's such a German myth. And if you read, this is a really horrible thing, if you read books on World War II where they mention like a quarter of a chapter on the invasion of Poland, they will always talk about that. And they're like, oh, the Poles went against these tanks with horses. But hold on a second. Germans also used horses at the same time to pull, you know, various different weapons. But that's what the Poles were doing. They were using those horses to pull various weapons and food and everything that was they needed behind the lines to be able to fight the Germans. They weren't charging on you know, horses like crazy people against a tank. I mean, who in their right mind logically would ever do that? They would to look primitive. This is the problem. The Germans wanted them to look primitive. And this kind of myth has continued, and it is continuing today to historians who still today, this very moment, write about this myth.
Yes, 303 Squadron, a great Polish RAF squadron, lots of German kills. What was the reality of these historians' discussions that you mentioned before we came on air about denigrating the reputation of 303 Squadron? Why is this happening now, 80 odd years after 1940?
Historians. They're all, I'm sorry, but, you know, we're all entitled to our own opinion. I understand that. But when you are a certain type of historian from a certain type of country who don't understand what it was like, I mean, this is the thing, we've got to put ourselves in these positions. You and I can sit here quite easily and say, oh, you know, it was a really bad thing that in concentration camps people stole from each other, just as an example. But these guys had either fought in the September campaign and had to leave, or they'd left as the September campaign was happening. You know, various different reasons why they left, but they still saw their country being bombed. I mean, Poland was so damaged and the terror was so horrific. People were being murdered left, right and centre. The Germans were coming along and seeing columns of people and shooting them down. These people knew what was happening back home. Information was coming out of Poland to what was happening back home, so they wanted to fight. So, of course, not just a 303, so we were going to talk very briefly about Narvik as well.
Yes.
This is exactly the same. So this point of view is going to work for both sides. So, for example, Grom, ORP Grom, when they would approach German...
That's the modern Navy destroyer.
Oh yes, this is one of the, probably, it's a legendary destroyer because the Germans hated it. Why did the Germans hate it? Because they would sneak up on the Germans and bomb them. And when I mean bomb them, they would obliterate them. And if you look at German records, testimonies and things like that, they were always like, oh, those bloody Polish people with their, you know, horrible destroyers and things like that, because the Poles wanted to win. They would sacrifice everything and anything, their whole lives. Everything was pushed into that very moment to win and pay them back for exactly what the Germans have done to their people at home.
So they had a fighting edge that... It's said that there was a gulf between the Western Allies, Britain, United States, and the occupied allies, for example, Poland, Free French, those kind of countries. The latter had a fighting edge that they say that the British and the US soldiers lacked. This idea of the motivational aspect.
Look, I do not want to say that there were bad soldiers, that they didn't fight. That is not what I'm saying before anybody wants to jump on this. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there was this drive for the Poles because they knew what was happening at home. They knew the information that's coming out of Poland with the massacres and Auschwitz and concentration camps and forced labour and the conditions. In Europe, the conditions in Poland were not replicated anywhere else. Absolutely. Don't get me wrong, the French also wanted to fight for their freedom, but when they're being rounded up, they're not being deported straight into concentration camps, their families being murdered, their Jews being thrown into ghettos and then being deported straight into crematoriums and gas chambers. It's a whole different world in Poland. They had this drive, and this drive is really important to remember.
Technologically, the Polish army transformed itself from you could say a post-World War I army style, very broadly speaking, into a World War II style army, mechanized transport, modern tanks, modern aircraft.
Yes, yes.
And that happened in the 1941, 42, 43. And these were people who were, in the Second Corps especially, were emaciated. They had come through this Siberian experience, and that they applied themselves very competently to the modern technology of a mechanized war.
Well, this is the thing, you've got to remember, those people coming in that were in Gulags and in Siberia and things like that, a lot of them were part of the reserves as well. So Poland's army, just before the invasion, obviously they mobilised, and during the invasion they mobilised loads of people who were necessarily, you know, career in the army. They could have been engineers, doctors, professors, you know, policemen, whoever, and they all, those specific people would end up in Siberia and in the Gulag. So Poland had a wealth of people that weren't just soldiers. They were incredible people that at home were engineers and aircraft technicians and, you know, whatever you could think of.
No technological slouches.
Exactly, and it's amazing, because the thing is, the Germans and the Soviets were trying to get rid of Polish intelligentsia. However, they seem to forget that a load of Polish intelligentsia ended up in Anders's army, where those people could still push technology, could advance. I mean, even British technology. It's not all about what Britain and America did and France and everybody else. Poles also had that advantage, you know.
Yes, it's the Mark I Polish land mine detector. So the Polish army has transformed itself into a mechanized force, and we're going to look now into one of the pinnacles of Polish military history, which is the Battle of Monte Cassino.
On the 4th of August 1941, the Polish Prime Minister and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, General Władysław Sikorski, nominated General Władysław Anders, just released from the Lubyanka prison in Moscow, to command an army made up of Polish soldiers and recruits in the Soviet Union. By the end of 1941, this new Polish force had recruited 25,000 soldiers. In March 1942, Stalin agreed to evacuate part of the Polish formation to Iran. About 79,000 Polish soldiers left the Soviet Union alongside 37,000 Polish nationals. What became known as Anders' army moved from Iran to Iraq and then to Palestine, where other Polish forces joined the formation. Notably, the arriving ranks included a curious companion, a bear named Wojtek, who would wrestle with Polish soldiers, drink beer, smoke cigarettes, steal ladies' underwear, and fight in the battles to come. Moved from Egypt to Italy, Anders' army turned the tide of the Italian campaign at the Battle of Monte Cassino. The abbey and the hill of Monte Cassino were the linchpin of German defences on the Gustav Line. Between January the 17th and May the 18th, the German garrison was attacked on 4 separate occasions by Allied troops. However, neither the Canadians, the Gurkhas nor Moroccan troops succeeded in pushing the Germans out. The Polish Second Corps launched the final assault of the German position. The battle was fierce, marked by dense mortar and artillery fire, little room for cover, and frequent hand-to-hand fighting. Finally, Polish forces captured the abbey on May the 18th, opening the road to Rome for the Allies and liberating Bologna. Objectives assigned by the Allied command. All of that at the cost of 923 dead, nearly 3,000 wounded, and over 300 Polish soldiers missing in action. Their sacrifice has since been remembered in Felix Konarski's song, The Red Poppies on Monte Cassino, with the lyrics going, "Years will go by, then centuries. The traces of old days won't go, and poppies on Monte Cassino will redder be from Polish gore."
We've been celebrating the anniversary of the battle, the 18th of May. Polish flag is hoisted up on the monastery ruins. Could you tell us? It's 1944. The Poles have been training on different technology, and they go into battle in Italy, at least the Second Corps. What was the significance of accepting the so-called invitation, I suppose, poison chalice, of leading the Corps into the fourth battle of Monte Cassino?
Monte Cassino is where the Poles really put their mark and showed the Allies exactly what they can do. Don't get me wrong, the Poles were brave in Narvik, they were brave in Tobruk, they fought on General Maczek, they took part in D-Day, they took part in all of those things. Yet again, in history, we're always being whitewashed, left, right and centre, and the Poles are never quite remembered, even with General Sosabowski, for example. In Arnhem, the Poles are just, they're just a footnote, oh, they took part. But Monte Cassino really, I mean, my gosh, do they really make an impact there? Because they are the ones, they're the ones that take Monte Cassino. It is a bit of a controversial thing amongst historians nowadays, where they're like, oh, well, what was the point in taking Monte Cassino? There was just no advantage to do so. I don't mind, ignore that, I don't care. My point is the Poles, what they did at Monte Cassino. The Americans couldn't do it, the British couldn't do it, but the Poles, on that last assault, went and did it with their bear, because I love that footage, by the way, of Wojtek the bear. You have to put Wojtek the bear in there, because he did. I mean, we don't acknowledge how much work that bear actually did to help the Polish Second Corps, managing to carry all those shells, to help them fight for what they did. Again, a lot of lives lost, a lot of lives, a lot of people missing. The cemeteries at Monte Cassino are huge and they're filled with the Polish dead. But at the end of the day, the Poles, like I'm going to underline that once more and once only, the Poles did it and the Allies didn't.
Like you said, the cemeteries have not just Roman Catholic soldiers, but Jewish soldiers,
oh, yes.
Belarusian names, Ukrainian names. It's old Poland.
It is, because the thing is that nowadays, I mean, whatever cemeteries you go to, really, even it's First World War, whatever, when we're talking about Poland and old Poland, we're so incorporated with, like you said, Belarus, even Lithuania, Latvia, all of those terrains that used to belong to Poland, and identity is quite a difficult. I mean, we've discussed this in previous sessions and things like that, where identity becomes quite difficult. And some people even held German names, for example, but yes, they, at the end of the day, identify themselves as Poles. And they're the ones that fought in Monte Cassino and sacrificed their lives for it.
We still see that the Polish soldiers, Polish troops are fighting against certain, what seem to be entrenched Western prejudice against. Yes. So we have the General Sosabowski being scapegoated for the Arnhem debacle. General Mark Clark, when he led his forces into the triumphal entry into Rome just after Monte Cassino was taken, he said, I don't want any fire brigades or Poles. I mean, and he's talking to a bona fide ally of the West. I really don't understand. How do we explain this?
Do you know what? In all honesty, I think part of it's also to do with propaganda. I'm going to touch on this anyway, but the Russian propaganda at this stage, is really rife, because they keep pushing this narrative that the Poles are all anti-Semites and they hate their Jews. Look, I'm not going to deny there's anti-Semitism everywhere, right? You can't deny that. But within Anders's army, it was quite strict. He did not accept that, and there were a lot of Polish Jews that ended up in Anders's army. Some ended up escaping into Palestine. Obviously, that's a whole different other kettle of fish to why they wanted to leave. And some of them would try and defect to the British army, because that would give them access to Palestine as well. So that kind of narrative of anti-Semitism gets pushed by the Soviets. Say, look, those guys, they're escaping, so they just don't want to be part with the Poles at the end of the day. So that's one reason. Second reason is even though we're subhuman to the Germans, I would say even a little bit, we're kind of lesser to the Allies too. We're just, Bob, that drunk uncle that you have that comes to the party. That's who the Poles are really at the end of the day. So we took Monte Cassino, we did a bit of Boulogne, we did some Arnhem and whatever, but at the end of the day, it's the British troops, it's the American troops, it's the French troops. We're the real true victors of this war. Those Poles, they're a little tool that we can use.
Did the Polish forces fail in their diplomatic efforts to press their case We know that from 1941, the Churchill Pact with the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And Poland was then relegated in terms of its importance. That seemed to dog Poland and Polish forces all the way to the end, to 1945.
Yeah, it's the Katyn massacre. I think that's really the turning point, because the Allies wanted the Soviet Union, because it's the only way they were going to win. So they have to be nice and befriend, Papa Stalin at the end of the day. But the Poles, I don't know if they could have done more. If Sikorski didn't die, I'm not Sikorski's biggest fan at the end of the day, but he did do a lot for Poland. Could Poland have done more? Possibly. But we're now sitting in a what if. And, we're straying slightly to dangerous territory into the what if. But at the end of the day, the Poles, I don't know if they could have done more. They were stuck. Stalin had such a, he had a literally unlimited amount of force, unlimited amount of people that he was, even when he was fighting the Germans, he was sending people without weapons to fight against the Germans. So he's got waves and waves of people. And the Allied forces, could they have done that? Did they want to sacrifice all those people like the Soviet Union?
The Poles fought right till the very end of the war, the last few days of the war. So was there any crisis of morale in the Polish forces, as far as you know? By 1945, they knew that the borders were going to be changed in at the conferences of Tehran, and you had all these rumours of the Yalta agreements coming up in 1945. What, in your opinion, do you think made the Poles fight and keep on fighting in that?
Well, you mentioned Bologna. That was an amazing, it's an amazing feat for the Poles. They did it. Their morale was way up through the roof there. In Berlin, when the Poles were part of Berling's army, they were also there in May of 45. Their morale was skyrocket high because they'd just taken Berlin. This is a massive success. At the end of the day, they knew what was coming, but I don't think they understood the extent of what was going to happen. Because when people ended up in displacement camps, for example, and were being sent home, or, for example, they were given access to going to Great Britain, they didn't know that when you went home, you could end up arrested and even executed as a spy. So what they did was they would send one person, maybe a second person, maybe a third person. So they were kind of in this limbo of what is going to happen, where are we going to go, how are we going to live our lives, where are we going to get the money from, what are we going to do? I mean, you can see amazing footage of majors and generals learning how to fillet fish, for example. Yes. This is crazy. A man who has just taken a division into battle and won a successful war is learning how to fillet fish, or learning how to fix a fan, or learning how to farm. They're still in that limbo stage. The morale depends on who you talk to.
Yeah. A final question to you, Alina. A couple of weeks ago, we had the VE Day celebrations, and a few token Poles were there in the parade, a few Polish soldiers. On a personal level, I felt still embittered because of the way the Poles were treated in 1946 in this great victory parade. No Poles there who had fought all this stuff that we've just seen. What's your reaction as a Pole of our generation? How do you react to that?
Oh, same as you. That's a little bit, why... Again, I've mentioned this so many times before. The Poles had such great victories, and yet they're still being, those silly Poles. Hold on a second. We did so many amazing things. People were not even fighting in Narvik in 1940, but the Poles went in there anyway. They were fighting, for God's sakes. They were giving their lives in submarines, in ships, in the Air Force. How many Poles were shot down from the sky? How many Poles went so far, so close to be able to get to their targets? How many Poles lost their lives going into Warsaw in 1944? How many of those pilots would... also the Allies as well, just not to, say...
Yes, the Commonwealth
exactly, but the Poles and the Brits Brits were the worst at it, meaning they were the ones who would fly meters above the buildings, and they were the ones who took the brunt of it. What about the Poles, like General Matek and all the victories that they took? Even in D-Day, the Poles were massacred in D-Day. You know, they were doing things to help. They also did, like you said, technology. Why are we not recognised for it? And publishers and people like that, they don't want to write about the Poles because it's just not as apparently exciting enough. Books sell if it's about the British or D-Day or Arnhem or things like that.
Yes, another bitter pill we have to swallow. Alina Nowobilska, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Great to have you. So that's all we have time for today. Join us next time. That's every Tuesday, 9:35 p.m, 21:35. See you then.